Welcome to NASDAQ Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at NASDAQ. Today's business leaders are looking to navigate the road ahead. There's a bit of rebuilding and reimagining the way they work and operate, given the changes that they faced over the past year. So what will it take for businesses to pivot from surviving to thriving in today's climate? Here with insights on emerging technology supporting the future of work is Don Weinstein, Corporate Vice President and Head of Global Product and Technology for NASDAQ-listed ADP. Don, it's great to meet with you. Welcome to Trade Talks.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
And Don, ADP supports companies of all sizes across the globe. What are you seeing as their most critical needs as they move toward recovery?
Well, first is basic business continuity. So we're talking about tools to manage their workforce digitally. You know, the pandemic has been the greatest driver of digital transformation we've ever seen. One simple example of that in our world here is, we see things like faster adoption of digital pay instruments because you need to be able to pay people if they're not sitting in your physical offices. But once you've made it past basic continuity, employers are more and more focusing on the health and the welfare of their workers and what can they do to enhance the resiliency of their workforce as the pandemic drags on now into a second year. And then finally, getting in front of that eventual return to the workplace. So you may see I'm in the office today, which we've opened back up here at ADP on a limited capacity, all volunteer basis. But that switch to remote work happened almost overnight for the many companies who could. But the return to the workplace will be a much more gradual process, and companies need tools to help them manage that transition back.
And some companies may not know where to start. From a technical standpoint, how do you recommend that they prioritize?
Well, we always prioritize safety first. Employers must ensure that they're putting in systems and tools that as they do bring people back into the workforce, that's going to protect them. So for instance, here at ADP, we developed a return to workforce toolkit that we used internally for our associates, and then realizing that many companies would need the same thing, we actually externalized it in order to help. And that includes things like surveys of who is ready and willing to volunteer to return to the office, scheduling so you can optimize the flow of workers in and out of the office and maintain that healthy balance you're looking for. We collect daily health attestations, and then we can also turn that around into contact tracing should one of their in-office workers subsequently test positive. And all of this is to help them be very agile and flexible in terms of how they manage their workforce in that very dynamic environment.
Big data continues to be a high value target for businesses. How do you see use of data evolving in this recovery?
Yeah, and when you have so much change happening so fast, it actually heightens the need for data. Early in the pandemic, we saw so much change happening that we recognized the need to augment our traditional reporting with more real-time insights about economic activity within our clients. So, we have a lot of data information. We can look at traditional metrics like employment levels and hours worked and wages paid, but we're also able to capture leading indicators like job postings and background checks that told us a lot about the future direction of the economy. I think, that helped us internally, and we feel like we came pretty close to calling the bottom in early May when we saw some of those activity metrics bottoming out and some of those leading indicators starting to pick up. And so again, we externalize some of these tools, and now we've got clients who are leveraging that. In particular, one of the most popular things is something we call data mashups, where you can start to bring in sources of data from a variety of different places, analyze how the pandemic has impacted business. So for instance, we've got clients who are mashing up data from multiple sources, like you look at your own internal workforce and location data, and now you start to overlay that with the global infections map that the CDC and other World Health Organizations put out. And then you can start to say, well, where do I have potential risks in my workforce? Where do I have potential opportunities? And how can I leverage that back into identifying who might be ready to return to an office, and where do we have maybe some more work to do? And again, where you have events changing so rapidly, that's what really increases the need to have as much real-time data as possible so you can paint the clearest picture of what's happening appropriately on the ground.
And Don, the one thing that is certain is change, of course. Given that ADP supports 860,000 companies worldwide, who are counting on you to anticipate what's ahead? What's your approach to designing tools for the future?
Yeah, we really like to think about this as holistically as possible. So we look at change happening across a number of dimensions. We want to start with the workforce itself. In particular, we've been looking at for a while this trend of companies moving away from traditional types of employment to the really rapid growth of something like the gig economy. And I'm not talking about just consumer gig economy platforms, but enterprises, companies like ours and others in the Fortune 500, really adopting a more agile approach to workforce management so that they can scale their workforce up and down. I mentioned pay before. I mean, the global pandemic has certainly accelerated advancements in digital pay as lockdowns around the world exposed some of the issues or challenges of processing and paper checks and the significant operational risk that poses. So we look at what's happening in the world of digital payments. Technology itself, we're experiencing rapid adoption of new more call them open ecosystem based models. Sometimes I refer to that as the appification of the enterprise. This is really enabled by the growth of the public cloud, and it makes it easier than ever for large enterprises to consume solutions for lots of different providers, and it's made it a lot easier for startups to get traction in the enterprise. And then all of these factors feed in together into the workforces of the future. And in particular, what we focus on is the employment practices where, companies are trying to manage through all of this, where big data meets the human reality of the workplace. And so it all falls to kind of to organizations, but often their HR departments to make sense of this evolving workplace and ensure that the organization can still, attract and motivate and engage talent. Especially, we think about so much of what we do historically in engagement as being practiced in person, whether they're team meetings, team buildings. Now we've gone to this all remote environment. So how do you keep in track of how engaged are my workers, who may be having issues, where do I see factors of burnout and stress and the like? And so I think that's a really key trend that we're focusing on as we roll forward into the future.
And toward the end of 2020, ADP identified key trends for 2021. With the world of work changing so quickly, what do you see persisting?
Well, for sure, we've seen a lot of change happening, and some of these were brought about by the recent events. I think others were continuations of previous trends, but maybe with a newfound momentum given the broader environment. I talked before about resiliency and the health and safety and welfare of the workforce. I think that's something that is now front and center. Another one that happened to coincide with the pandemic, but I would call it just a heightened focus on diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, and a recognition that has now penetrated into the workforce more so than ever, where workers want to know where companies stand on it. And companies need to kind of get out in front and make sure they don't have any blind spots in terms of the equity and inclusiveness of their workforce. I think we're seeing an increase and an acceleration in the scope and the pace of regulatory change. Governments around the world continue to see employers as tools for achieving policy objectives and driving societal change. I'll look just here in the US right now, the debate around the $15 an hour minimum wage is just one such example of government trying to affect policy and driving that through the workforce and through employers. And then the other one that we're really focused big on now is what I'll call flexible work arrangements. We've transitioned from a world where the majority of workers were working, in a work site. It could be an office or a remote work site location, but in a specific location. As we talked about overnight, we switched that and sent large number of people, not everybody. I mean, plenty of people, in certain industries are still going to their traditional work site, but a lot of more traditional office or white collar workers moved out into remote work arrangements. Now there's a talk about returning to the workplace, but few organizations think we're going to go back to exactly the way it was before. So now it's sort of a new normal where there's this dynamic environment of, yes, we'll have some people back in the office some of the time, others will be working remotely. In my world of technology, we built a lot around this concept of of agile, and sometimes we use the term scrum teams to talk about, small groups working together in an agile environment face to face. So much of what we built fits around that model. And so now we're trying to evolve into, well, what does this future of work look like where we don't have everybody coming into the office and sitting side by side? What kind of tools do we need to enable us to continue to be productive and collaborative in that type of virtual environment?
And Don, as you reflect on the past year in the world of work, what for you are the biggest lessons learned?
Well, certainly a lot has changed in the past year. I'll take it on two different vectors here. One is business continuity. It's taken on a whole new meaning. I mean, we always did continuity planning in the past, but probably not to the level of a multi-year global pandemic wreaking havoc on companies and economies around the world, disrupting employment structures, transportation systems, you name it. So really causes us to think differently about the overall resiliency and continuity of our business operations. But at the same time, we talked a lot about technology change, and technology is critical to enabling this environment, enabling organizations to continue to survive in this environment. But people are still the lifeblood of every business. And it's something we've always known. Sometimes it gets pushed a little bit to the back burner, and then it's times like this when it comes back to the forefront, where it's the old adage that you need to take care of your workers and you need to focus on their health and their safety and their well-being. And they in turn are the ones who take care of your customers and the company. And that's just harder to do when we're in this kind of remote environment. And so not losing sight of that and making sure that we continue to stay focused on that, even when we have such a distributed, out-of-pocket kind of workforce.
All right, Don, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ.